Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. This is year 7 of the 17 Verses podcast. I'm your host, Maher Haq. In this podcast, we take a small selection from the Quran every day and recite it to you in plain English, so you can get a small slice of God's word while you go about your day. By averaging 17 verses per day, we're able to break the Quran down into manageable pieces and finish it in 1 year. If you enjoyed the podcast, please help spread the word. Tell your friends and family, subscribe in Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcasts, and write us a review. Show notes and a transcript can be found at 17verses.com. That's the numbers 17verses.com. Today's selection is from Surah 79, An-Naziat, or Those Who Tear Out, verses 1 through 26. These verses talk of the end times, when the righteous and the wicked will face the ultimate judgment of God. Plus, there's a lesson about arrogance from the time of Moses and the Pharaoh of Egypt. Tafsir for this selection draws the conclusion in verse 6, which is set up by the first 5 verses of this selection. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, most gracious, most merciful. By those angels who tear out the souls of the wrongdoers, and those who gently draw out the souls of the righteous, and those who glide about swiftly through space, then speed headlong to carry out the commands of God, and those who regulate the affairs of the world. The day on which the quake shall cause a violent commotion will be followed by another violent commotion, and on that day hearts shall be pounding with terror, and sight shall be downcast. The unbelievers say, shall we really be restored to our former state of life, when we shall have become hollow bones? They further say, it would then be a fruitless restoration. But verily, it will be but a single compelling cry, when behold, they will be in the full awakening to judgment. Have you heard the story of Moses? His Lord called him in the sacred valley of Tuwa, and said, go to Pharaoh, for he has indeed transgressed all bounds, and tell him, have you the desire to purify yourself? If so, I shall guide you towards your Lord, so that you may fear him. Then Moses showed Pharaoh the mighty sign, but he denied and disobeyed. Then he quickly turned back, assembled his people, and made a proclamation, I am your Lord, the Most High. Consequently, Allah seized him for punishment, both in the hereafter and in this life. Surely in this there is a lesson for the God-fearing. Ameen. Now concerning the conclusion in verse 6, drawn from the first 5 verses of the surah, quote, the evidence of the wonderful working of the spiritual world having been invoked in the first 5 verses, the conclusion is now drawn and stated. It is certain that one great day, to be taken in a spiritual sense as the day of account, the whole world as we now see it in our life will be in violent revolution. It will be like an earthquake destroying all landmarks, but that will affect only things subject to change. They will suffer violent convulsions as a preliminary to their disappearance. But Allah and His divine order will not change. His face abides forever, full of majesty, bounty, and honor. Unquote. Thank you. This concludes today's episode of the 17 Verses podcast. I hope that this selection helps increase your understanding of the Holy Quran just a little bit. If you like the podcast, you can subscribe in iTunes or Stitcher and write us a review. Or you can grab the RSS feed and put it into your own podcast app. The show notes, including a text version of this episode, can be found by going to 17verses.com. That's the numbers 17verses.com. Thank you, and be well.